Good evening. This is Mae Brussell. The title of this broadcast is World Watchers. It's program number 764, July 28th, 1986. Last week at the end of the broadcast, the last 5 minutes, I was talking about Franklin Camper, a gentleman who runs a mercenary school in Alabama. Now he was arrested on firebombing charges in San Bernardino, California. I'm going to continue that now, and for the next 5 or 6 weeks, I'm going to lead you through maybe a complicated route, but maybe it won't be so complicated for long listeners, and try to tie together a lot of things that are happening in the news today that center around people like Franklin Camper, the mercenary schools, and the decision of the President of the United States to now send military troops into 50 states of the United States for the purpose of drug control, which is a real coup d'etat, and also to overthrow democratic countries in the world, starting with Bolivia and then India, to assure that $80 billion drug traffic a year that is taking place, with people like Ronald Reagan and Henry Kissinger being the king and the decision makers for these policies. Before I get into that, I just want to tell you about a book that's available, a listener to World Watchers got for me. It's called The Pope and the New Apocalypse, The Holy War Against Family Planning, by Dr. Stephen Mumford. This book is free. You write to the Center of Research for Research on Population and Security, P.O. Box 13067, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina 27709. And in addition to it being free, when you get it, this book, it gives you the address and the cost of another book called American Democracy and the Vatican, Population Growth and National Security. The president uses national security easily when he brings the troops into the 50 states. That book is $7.95, and the address for ordering that book is included with the one that is free. The interesting part about this book is the naming of Knights of Malta, the realization of the intrusion of the Roman Empire upon the decisions in this country, the close link to the Reagan administration, and how it is influencing the world and is influencing us, and the power it has that it shouldn't have as a religion. The Catholic Church can tell Catholics what to do. The problem with Mr. Scalia, the new Chief Justice that will be appointed in the United States, speaking about birth control, is that he's against contraceptives of any kind, and he is the most devout Catholic, or the first Italian Catholic, to be on the Supreme Court. Now, he takes his orders from Rome, but he can't be one of a team telling us what to do on that matter, because the Roman Empire doesn't run our Supreme Court. He can tell Catholics what to do, but I wonder about the legality of them telling everyone to do what the Catholics do, or don't do what they can't do. And I just wonder how long it will take for people to catch on, but this Dr. Mumford sees the relationship of the Roman Empire and the Vatican to what is happening in the world, and I think it's very important to get a hold of it. I appreciate the copy I have. Now, Judge Kaufman was appointed by Ronald Reagan to head what was called the President's Commission on Organized Crime, which is a farce. Of course, he wouldn't go into Paul Laxalt or Raymond Donovan and some of Reagan's cronies. Judge Kaufman, who headed this commission, was the same judge who prosecuted Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. His assistant in the prosecution was a young lawyer named Roy Cohn, who's now in Maryland dying of AIDS. Roy Cohn has been linked with drug people and narcotics traffickers all of his political and legal life, and represented the biggest of them. He also was, I'll say past tense because he's for all purposes dead, on the board of Western Goals with John Singlaub, who ties into this story of drug dealers and cocaine traffickers also. And Reagan is making the world safe for those people and wiping out the competition. Now, the President's Commission on Organized Crime gave a report, and in one sentence or two describes the mentality that feeds Ronald Reagan's preconceived thought of what he's going to do anyway. The report said, in quotes, an airborne, amphibious, and overland invasion of the United States by the drug mafia is underway, the Commission said in its final report on narcotics traffic. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military, should be instructed by the highest levels of government. The hostile or destructive action from within or without, overt or covert, shall include the invasion of this country by drug smugglers. Now that is so childish. The drug smugglers have been invited into this country. There's no invasion. But because he recommended that the Joint Chief of Staff get involved, Reagan was more than willing then to counteract and get the military going on this very matter. And he responded appropriately for Ronald Reagan. The Rocky Mountain News, this is out of Colorado, Denver, Colorado, a good place for drug trafficking, had an article June the 8th, Presidential Directive declares drug threat to national security. President Reagan has authorized step-up military action to thwart drug trafficking by signing a secret directive that declared drugs a national security threat. Where's the secret if he overtly says it's a threat? Goodness knows what else is in there. This article says for the first time, the United States government specifically states that the international drug trade is a national security concern because of its ability to destabilize democratic allies through the corruption of police and judicial institutions. Can you imagine the nerve of saying that it destabilizes democratic allies? We put in the Shah of Iran, which was not a democratic ally, and Mr. Pinochet, who's not a democratic ally, and the team down, Mr. Banzer, Hugo Banzer, and the drug team in Bolivia that are not democratic allies. The Democrats, when they get into power, are not allowed to make the same profit that the fascists make in drug making. That's why Ronald Reagan has targeted Bolivia and India as the first targets to send in troops, if he can, to eradicate drugs. The Democratic allies don't join us with their fascist thinking and mentality, and the people that we've put into the drug trafficking are not the Democratic allies. It hasn't hurt the Democratic allies. It has hurt the fascists who lose control of their country, just as the Chinese government and the Chiang Kai-shek family lost a good hunk of drug traffic when they were forced to become somewhat democratic. The drug traffic is a national security threat to our banks now. They're all going broke because they're so used to the profits that the banks are collapsing, and we have to keep the flow of drugs coming in. And what Ronald Reagan's going to do is use the military selectively to bring in the people he wants to deal the drugs with. And when you get another administration, as I said, when Jimmy Carter ran against Ronald Reagan, he had another team of drug dealers, and what we're seeing is a drug war, but now the drug war is coming close to home. Reagan defined the drug trade, as I say, as a national security threat. That gives him the entree to do anything he wants. Washington Post had a story June 9th, military role and drug fight outlined. The U.S. military personnel will be allowed to help U.S. agencies and foreign governments plan assaults on narcotic traffickers, equip police force, and transport them to attack sites under a new presidential directive because drug traffic is now a national threat. The secret national security directive revealed Saturday by Vice President Bush will permit the armed forces to dedicate personnel, equipment, radar-equipped airplanes, satellites to fight drug traffic, and so forth. Military assistance against narcotics has been limited mostly to training U.S. and foreign personnel to provide on loan to these various countries, but now, because of the big drug traffic, Caspar Weinberg and the military are going to use the armed forces. Morton Halpern, director of the Washington Office of American Civil Liberties Union, said he is concerned that involving the armed forces in drug control might lead to covert activities such as surveillance of U.S. citizens that would be illegal under ordinary law enforcement procedures. The military should stay out of law enforcement. They're not trained in it. And when Ronald Reagan was governor of California and Ed Meese was his advisor, they used the military, and the Pentagon was used by Richard Nixon, to illegally take pictures and surveillance of ordinary citizens, law-abiding citizens. It was used in the United States before. The papers were supposed to be destroyed. They were not destroyed, and they were put into the hands of a computer in Los Angeles to be transferred to John Singlaub and an organization of Western goals, also Roy Cohn and Admiral Thomas Moore, and so forth, the same military that will invade this country under the guise of drug traffic. And the danger of coming to American citizens is here. Mr. Halpern is speaking too late because the directive already says what they're going to do in using the military, not just training them. July the 4th, on the anniversary of our country's founding, our Freedom Day, that we celebrated so gallantly, disgustingly I should say, The Sacramento Bee had a story, Military May Aid 50-State Drug War. Attorney General Edwin Meese said Thursday that a major drug eradication program is in store in all 50 states. Now, anyone they suspect of knowing a drug dealer or having drugs and so forth can be attacked by the military, and this is the first time the military may take an active role in the United States in 50 states. The military participation in such a program would appear to be the first since President Reagan's April 8th directive. Now, he didn't wait much time, did he? April 8th said that drugs are a national security threat, and July the 4th he says we're going to put the military into 50 states of the United States. Now, if Reagan couldn't use terrorism as an excuse for a takeover of this country and for the finalized coup, he can always use the military and a drug war, but he has the police state ready and lined up in 50 states to do what they want. This Sacramento Bee says the directive classified drug trade as national security and allowed the stepped-up use of military force to stop the drug flow. Formerly, they were used for Operation Delta 9 last year for marijuana, but now the directive has gone out, and last year drug traffic wasn't national security. The president slipped that in April, and by July 4th of this year, the troops can be in any state at any time they want. Now, not separate from Reagan's goal to do that, which he did in the 70s and as I say, went into the computers of John Singlaub, I just want to read a brief article, a column, written by Conrad Egg for The Guardian on an arrest of some important people, which I mentioned before. I haven't had time to delve into this because it is so vast, but I will get into it after I complete the Franklin Camper series because they parallel and are part of this whole series, but I'll take that as a second part and go with the Franklin Camper story first because I believe in my order it's the priority. This article by Conrad Egg, who is an expert on these subjects, a very good writer, is titled Journalists Charge Calero Planned Assassinations. I mentioned Calero a few weeks ago, but I'll refresh your mind and go into the details of the story. The list of defendants in a $23.8 million civil suit was filed in Miami May 29th, and it reads like a who's who among the Nicaraguan Contras and their supporters. FDN leader Adolfo Calero, General John Singlaub of the World Anti-Communist League, former CIA Deputy Director Ted Shackley. Now, Singlaub and Shackley go back to the Vietnam War, working with William Colby in the Phoenix program, and when that war was over, Colby was brought to the United States to head up the Central Intelligence Agency, and a few weeks ago I was telling about Litton Industry being turned over at Fort Detrick, Maryland, that Air Force combine, to the laboratories that did biological and chemical warfare by Richard Nixon. And I said at that point the war came home to direct the chemicals and the biological and the intensity of the military and the CIA to people at home. And those were the years when the COINTEL program was unleashed, the Operation Chaos, and so forth. Now, Singlaub and Shackley, of course, are part of the Vietnam Southeast Asia conflict that came home, and they're involved in a lot more, which would take a lifetime to study, but right now they've been indicted along with these anti-Castro Cubans and others. Andy Messing of the National Defense Council Foundation is one of the defendants. John Hull, owner of a ranch in northern Costa Rica, allegedly used as a Contra base, as well as 25 other Contras, exiled Cubans. Oh, there's an airplane going overhead. Can you hear it? There's a window outside the studio, and you can hear this airplane going overhead. Maybe that's the military with the drugs. I better hide them. Oh, boy. Okay. Back to the subject. John Hull is one of the defendants, owner of a ranch in northern Costa Rica, allegedly used as a Contra base, is one of the defendants, and 25 other Contras. Exiled Cubans, alleged Colombian cocaine smugglers that collaborate with the Contras. And Colombia, as against the Bolivian, is very important because there is this drug war between the states, and now we've sent in our troops to attack Bolivia as a very good starter and for very good reasons. The suit charges that Calero helped plan an assassination attempt against ARDE leader Eden Pastora in May of 1984. Pastora has since stopped fighting the Sandinistas, and he's moved to Costa Rica permanently. They planned to kill him, and about 7 journalists were killed in the room. He was injured at the time. Pastore had refused to join the CIA-funded Contra alliance called the FDN. This bombing was allegedly carried out by an exiled Libyan, Ahmak Galil, and Libya is very important into this story of Camper and the connections to the Sikhs and the Sikh assassination teams, and I'll get back to it later. But Libyan Amal Galil is important. He was posing as a journalist. He had previously worked for the Chilean secret police, and that, again, is very important in this story, the links of Chile, Dina, Mr. Pinochet, and the drug-dealing connections of South America and the fascists to Henry Kissinger, who was in charge of the coup with Richard Nixon that made Pinochet possible, put in the secret police force, Dina, and their agent, this Libyan, Ahmak Galil, was the journalist, posing as a journalist, the one who did the bombing, where so many were killed and others were hurt. Other defendants are charged with gun running, violating U.S. Neutrality Act, by aiding the Contras, and smuggling large amount of cocaine into the United States to supplement the Contras' income. Now, while the president has declared war in 50 states with the U.S. military, one thing that makes it possible is allowing the flow of cocaine into this country so that the military, just put aside the police and regular law enforcement, can enter and get their feet right into it, because it is a national security matter, and the president has now allowed the Pentagon to move that way. The suit was brought by journalists Tony Avirgan and Martha Honey. Avirgan was severely injured in that assassination attempt. Avirgan and Honey received numerous death threats while investigating the bombing. Trying to find out who bombed them and killed their friends, they've been getting death threats. The civil suit alleged that one of their key sources, by the name of David X., was kidnapped and tortured and killed in 1985 after the Contras, these are our CIA people like Theodore Shackley and General John Singlaub, after the Contras saw him talking to gringo journalists. David X. had allegedly informed Honey and Avirgan about a Contra plot that was going to blow up the United States Embassy in Costa Rica. This is another agent provocateur thing we do to blame the other side. The suit charges that the bombing was to be blamed on the Nicaraguan government in order to generate increased funding and support from U.S. sources. The last time we saw a sample of that was the Berlin bombing, where 2 Americans died, and that was the excuse for the United States Army to start attacking Gaddafi in Libya and bomb 2 cities in Libya. The article concludes the journalist's complaint also alleged that the attack was meant to murder U.S. Ambassador Louis Tams, TAMBS, reputed Colombian cocaine smuggler Pablo Escobar, also a defendant in the civil suit, is said to have offered $1 million bounty to kill Tam. As ambassador to Colombia, Tams had angered the drug smugglers by working to prosecute the drug kingpins. Now, if this is confusing for you, the Contras, who just received $100 million from our Congress, had planned, and they knew about this. This case was in the open and in the news before the $100 million was allocated to them again. They wanted to kill an American ambassador in the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica and blame Nicaragua as an excuse for us to go in there. And they wanted to kill the ambassador because he was trying to prosecute drug dealers in Colombia, and the cocaine for this operation that flows into the United States by the CIA and by the anti-Castro Cubans and by the various elements of the Somoza army and so forth is what is flooding the United States with drugs. The contradictions are horrendous, and how Ronald Reagan gets away with this, I really don't know. There's going to be a filibuster in the Senate on the money for the Contras. I hope this comes up. Now, to get to the area that connects, in a few weeks I'll connect it to these people. I want to continue where I left off last week. I was quoting an article from the Los Angeles Times, Wednesday, May 21st, titled 5 Arrested in Firebombing of Car. And this is about Franklin Camper, who was arrested in Birmingham, Alabama, who runs a mercenary school in Alabama that is well known and sends killers all over the world. And he's been picked up in this country and gotten off all possible prosecution or indictment before. He's a selected darling of the FBI and the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, But this time he couldn't get away with it, and they did plant an informer in his camp and picked up his activities, and he was arrested for them. I mentioned last week the arrest was because of an accident that took place in San Bernardino County, and it's a 42-page criminal complaint issued May 20th, 1986, and it involved Franklin Camper and an undercover agent who posed as a trainee at his camp, who came out as part of a 4-man mission to California, and 2 bodyguards hid in a tree with rifles, and the women had guns in their bras, and they almost shot the daughter of one of the women who had hired them to come to California. These men were hired to bother, harass, or harm, and the details are, except for firebombing, aren't really out in the open yet. But 2 ladies who teach nursery school quit 1 or 2 of the 5 nursery schools that were owned by these other parties, Mrs. Wyckoff and Mrs. Hamilton, and they were taken to the National Relations Board or the State Labor Board about their being fired at the school. And so the people who owned the school turned to Franklin Camper for help. Now, it seems awfully ridiculous to spend so much money to bring him there, where for a little bit of a fee, they could have settled it in California. Special Agent Tom Miller of the Treasury Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms said that they watched television segments of Camper on 60 Minutes, the ladies. The excuse for using Camper was that they saw him on 60 Minutes, he was on Phil Donahue also, and they were interested because he said he conducted investigation for businesses, and he really wanted to help people solve their problems. Those are the quotes that he gave. So they called him in Alabama, and this national publicity. So he comes out to California. He agreed to come to California, and he told the special agent he was hired by the 2 ladies to locate and identify people who were giving them harassing telephone calls at night. There was some vandalism at the school in these phone calls. Now, Franklin Camper is so important into the scene of working with people who had the failed invasion of Dominica, with the Klan, the Nazis, the Sikh assassins, with the FBI, with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. His contacts are endless. So the very fact that they say to him, I want you to see who's bothering our telephone and harassing us at night is a little bit ridiculous. There is more to this story than we saw him on television and we wanted to know who was making these calls. The telephone company will put a tap on your call and locate them very easily if you're really getting nuisance calls. You don't pay for 4 people to come from Alabama and not such a motley crew. So Camper flew to San Diego. The tickets were paid by the school. They used a rental car. The motel was paid by the school. And he was joined by 2 of his agents, Mr. Cuneo and Mr. Hedgecorth and Mr. Johnson, and they drove from Alabama to Southern California. And so they allegedly were looking for people who were bothering Mrs. Wyckoff and Hamilton, as if you need 4 such people to see who's making these telephone calls. And Camper told the school owners that he talked with that he would not be of real assistance to these particular people. That's what he said afterwards, that he didn't intend to be a real assistance, but he left 2 people there as bodyguards to watch the Wyckoff home when he returned to Alabama. And then he returns again back to California. And a special agent, Roger Guthrie, attended Camper's school and posed as a student there and heard discussion of possible violation of federal firearms laws. And he heard the 3 men, Cuneo and Johnson and Hedgecorth, discuss a proposal that was put up by Camper that each man would make $1,000 and go to California to do unconventional action. And the reason this article at Camper's role is so important is that he's been caught at the nuclear plant, Crystal River in Florida, in March of '81, and he was never arrested or indicted. He was photographed on the TV news with another man, Mr. Lisenby, and they had a gun. They were going out to murder somebody in Miami. He never was indicted. So now he's out for unconventional action in the United States again. And then the people that went out there were told that it wasn't going to be a very nice thing. It was more than unconventional action. It was going to harm people, and they knew that when they went to California. The ladies gave him between $3,000 and $5,000 to pay the expenses of Camper while his team were in California, and Wyckoff and Hamilton insisted that they themselves didn't participate in the fire bombings. They've been indicted for hiring Camper, and that they didn't know about it. And the woman who was present when a lot of the conversation went on was the daughter of Mrs. Wyckoff. Her name is Shirley Wright. And I mentioned last week that the mother, Mrs. Wyckoff, has been charged as of July 18th, 1986, with trying to plot to have her daughter murdered because she would be the sole witness. The men were paid in cash, and in order to get Mr. Camper off and the others off, she had to murder her own daughter, and she's been indicted for that. So that's the activities they do at home. Her daughter had said that she met two men at the house, and they allegedly were supposed to be bodyguards. They were carrying firearms and weapons, the men that her mother had arranged to bring, the excuse being that their phone was being bugged with nuisance calls. And you bring 4 people to California armed with weapons in their bras and pants and everywhere else, and it's a little questionable about the purposes. He must have known it was going to be more. Now, this past May 31st, almost 2 months ago, there was an article in Wire Service all over the country. 5 Sikhs held an alleged bomb plot. Group have targeted Air India 747. This is a new plan to kill off people in Air India, about 300 people that were going to leave Kennedy Airport at 8:15. John Kennedy Airport in New York City, Flight 110 on a Friday, and they were going by way of London to India, and the celebration in India that they were remembering with a bomb on Air India was what they called Genocide Week, commemorating the time when Mrs. Gandhi ordered the invasion of the Golden Temple and 1,200 Sikhs were killed. True, 1,200 were killed, and it isn't fair, but hardly anyone on Air India going down, 300 this time and 300 last time, had very much to do with politics in India. People should be aware of politics in other countries, but they're not. And these Sikhs were held for this bombing plot as of May 31st. Now, the chronology of the Sikh terrorism and the links to Franklin Camper and the power they have is important, and I just want to highlight a few of these dates in chronological order, which I like to do. And it's hard to remember their names. I may not pronounce them right, and I won't spell them for you. You won't remember them anyway, but I can print them on a type sheet, so we learn to know some of them. Now, just a year ago, May the 5th, 1985, 5 Sikhs were arrested with plans to murder Rajiv Gandhi in the United States. And those Sikhs were trained by Franklin Camper in Alabama, the same Camper that was arrested in Riverside just this past May 19th. 5 of them were arrested, and they had been training with Rajiv Gandhi in Alabama. May the 6th, 1985, there was an article about their training camp also in New Jersey. 1 month later, the Khalistani terrorists, with links to Babar Khalsa, blew up Air India, where 300 people were killed. That was after the arrest on the plan to kill Rajiv Gandhi. June 23rd, 300 were killed. April of 1985, also, there were 2 prominent Sikhs, Parmar and Lakhbir Singh, that toured Ontario, Canada, fomenting violence. They had protests against Indian Embassy in Ottawa, May the 3rd, 1985, just before Rajiv Gandhi would have been murdered, and a month before the plane went down. Now, May 19th this year, Franklin Camper was arrested. As I said, he works allegedly with the FBI and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and there's a suggestion in some articles that he's now singing about his former employers and the Canadian government, and this is why there have been recent arrests, and the Canadians have decided to clean up their act regarding the Sikh activities in Toronto and in Vancouver and so forth. May 27th, a week after Camper's arrest, an undercover agent for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Khalistani, they had a plot to bomb the Canadian Exposition in Vancouver. They were arrested. They were going to Los Angeles to get weapons to smuggle into Canada, to purchase rocket launchers, plans to destroy power lines. And also May the 27th, there was an arrest of 4 members of the Sikh Youth Federation, and that's an important group like the Hitler Youth. They attempted to murder Milkang Singh and Mr. Milkang Singh Sidhu, visiting from Punjab, and he is another Sikh of a different faction, and that's important to get this difference, which I'll explain in the weeks to come. The shooting attempt was in Campbell River on Vancouver Island, right outside of Courtenay, not very far from where I have my property up there on Vancouver Island. There were 4 shots. He was forced off the road. and important people from the Youth Federation, the Young Sikh movement, were held responsible and were arrested in Vancouver. The headquarters are in Vancouver. I'll take a 1-minute break and go back to the chronology of the Sikh arrests and terrorism and the relation to Franklin Camper. And then, if we have time this week, or if not, next week, take it down to Ecuador and South America and link it to the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, and the Afghanistan-Pakistan connections. There's a lot of connections. I'm leading to them, but I want to go through these terrorism arrests in Canada and the United States before I go on to the next part. As I say, we'll take a 1-minute break and continue with the story of the violence training also in Alabama. This is Mae Brussell and part 2 of broadcast number 764. Incidentally, that property that I have on Vancouver Island, I'm selling it. I bought it with another lady, and she doesn't want to keep her property. We can't subdivide it, so it's for sale. But every time we've gone up there, which isn't often enough, but go up there camping, every single time there's been all kinds of harassment and obvious knowledge of the minute I cross over the Canadian border, of the Royal Canadian, in some way, they must know when I cross over that border. I'm not aware of that kind of harassment here in this country, and it's more obvious in a little place on your own private campground on Vancouver Island than it is here in Carmel. It's more obvious there, where we're somewhat isolated on the beaches and on my own property. But just this past month, I got a letter, World Watchers International, to my address at home, and the postmark is from Courtney, British Columbia. And I thought, oh, that's great, what a small world, because usually people who write these letters want information on the tape and want to take the tapes, and I thought that was great, to someone in Courtney writing to World Watchers. And I opened the letter, and it was a request for information regarding World Watchers, and it was written by a man whose first name is John, who lives in Vancouver, which is across from the island, the mainland of Canada. But the only thing that was unusual about the letter, not the fact that the postmark came from Courtney, which is right next to Campbell River, where these Sikhs obviously have a lot of power and are organized enough to try murders up in that little area, but it could be postmarked from there and then mailed, written by a person in Vancouver. But the letter was addressed to the other person who owns the property with me. And I don't think there is anyone on planet Earth except my family and the Canadian tax people that know the partner that I have in Canada. And I had just paid the taxes in this time period, just in the last few weeks or so, probably about when this letter came, and I thought that somebody in the Canadian government, because I didn't use a stationer that said World Watcher. So I just want to mention that, because the letter came to me, and I do update at different times things that are coincidences or things I can't figure out, or even potentially dangerous. But the letter was addressed to the person who owns the property with me and requesting tapes from World Watchers, and of course she has nothing to do with this program, and I don't know how in the world they would get her name off, except off the official Canadian papers. Now, moving away from Campbell River and then down to that May 31st attempt to bomb Air India in New York City, last June 23rd, 1985, those same people that blew up Air India were suspected and released. They were released on bail, and they were suspected now and linked to the very people that were responsible for trying the next one. They successfully blew up one and last year, and now another one was going to be blown up. June 15th, 1986, the Sikh terrorists, members of Babar Khalsa's group, moved out of Hamilton, Ontario, and they conspired to commit acts of terrorism. They were going to fly to Pakistan and then get smuggled into India and blow up the Indian Parliament. They had a few little projects they were going to do when 7 of them were stopped leaving out of Ontario. They were going to blow up the Indian Parliament. They were going to assassinate Rajiv Gandhi on June 21st. They were going to kidnap children, members of the Parliament, and Talwinder Singh Parmar was arrested. He directed the Air India bombing, and this was his project starting June 15th to enter India by way of Pakistan. Now, there's been several sources that said that these same groups, these Sikhs, were planning to kill Rajiv Gandhi when he went to Mexico, when he visited Mexico. and the youth group have been the youth team of the Sikh group. These assassination teams have been active, very active with the plan, as I say, to kill Rajiv Gandhi. And there's now just one item I saw in a newspaper that Franklin Camper, a confessed informant for the FBI and Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who's now in prison in California on bombing charges. He's actually in Alabama now. He was arrested in California. Could possibly be giving information out about the Sikhs in order to get himself off of jail. Being an informant, that's what he does the best. And he could give information about the plans that they had earlier, even though many of them were known, and as soon as they're arrested, they're released. Now, Franklin Camper's name isn't new, and on broadcast 716, that was in August of 85, I went into an article describing parts of it called War Games, Alabama's Woods, Frank Camper Trains Men to Repel Invaders, Prep School for Mercenaries has Notorious Graduates, Seminar in Throat Cutting, Paramilitary Fantasy Land. Now, the thing about this is when the President of the United States declares a war in the United States and national security is involved, and is going to or can use, it's on the books now, the government, military, the Defense Department in any or all 50 states. These people are not separated from the military, and they've trained a good hunk of those military, and the chickens are now coming home to roost, and they will be roosting in the United States. Just briefly, for those of you who don't remember the broadcast in August of 85, this is the gist of the Wall Street Journal article. Camper, soldier, journalist, Porsche mechanic, Disney World fanatic, runs a mercenary association. He spends a week teaching 13 people how to kill. 1 week just using sticks, hands, feet, knives, ropes, firearms of all descriptions, how to ambush, patrol, camouflage, booby traps, and there's pre-dawn seminars on torture. Since 1981, Reagan's election, coincidentally with the time Ronald Reagan came into power, and this was a big shift of power in the United States, an escalation of taking over America, which really began with the murder of John Kennedy and was consummated in those 6 years that Nixon was in office, and now it'll be 8 years that Ronald Reagan's in office. In 1981, after Reagan was elected, Camper started his school very quietly. In the spring of 85, he came to international attention when 7 Sikhs were indicted in New York City and in New Orleans in a plot to murder India Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. All were alumni of the Mercenary Association. The Camper said he cooperated with the FBI to help foil the Sikhs' alleged plots, and he took credit for trying to stop what they were doing, but he doesn't talk about the airplane that blew up and the actual murders. He maybe have given information to stop the murder of Rajiv Gandhi in the United States, but he's been involved with them in other activities that they plan on going on to do later, and the FBI confirms his claim. The indictments have raised lurid questions about whether facilities such as campers are more than playgrounds for the military-minded amateurs. Camper thinks that he's preparing a fighting elite, an inevitable communist invasion in this country. Attorney General in Alabama said the Mercenary Association is an embarrassment to the state. Camper students are tied to trees, fires are lighted under them, and they describe it as the worst thing that ever happened to them. The course is designed for brutalization, for fatigue, for tear gas, for live ammunition, and they introduce their own capacity for inflicting pain. That's like G. Gordon Liddy, who I talked about last week, and his ability to inflict pain and burn his own hand. They seem to enjoy all of this. People who go here are members of a peculiar, budding subculture, adherents of mercenary chic. The growth took place 10 years ago when Soldier of Fortune came out. Now there are more than 5 glossy magazines. So starting again, as I said before, Soldier of Fortune, put up with money from John Singlaub of the Defense Department. He works with the National Security Agency. He works with the CIA. How do you separate Singlaub from any one of those, or did any of those put up the money for Soldier of Fortune? This is identical to the Freikorps in Germany that was linked to the military, that appeared to be on its own, that started doing murder and torture, that was not separate from the military, but appeared to be until 1933 when Hitler was in power. And John Singlaub works with the Los Angeles Police Department, with Western Goals, with computers and names of law-abiding citizens. With Western Goals, he's on the board of Western Goals, which is a combination of military and MAFIA and counterintelligence, collecting files on people in the United States. And he runs this school and has mail order houses in his magazines, and so do the other Gung Ho, Soldier of Fortune, the mercenary magazines have addresses where people can be hired, be sent out as mercenaries. The Wall Street Journal went on, the military-minded America has, without a declared war to fight, has let their imaginations take them to hostile territory. Now, that was written in 1985, in August of 85, a year ago. But now there is a declared war. National security is at stake. Drug dealers, and they can tear up territory and not get drug dealers, but begin to spread terror in the United States because the president has declared war in the United States. And the Wall Street Journal goes on to the type of people that are trained there and how they learn to kick people in the groin. That's their first exercise when they start off. Hit them hard enough to lift them off the ground. And they have a seminar in throat cutting and booby traps. And there's only one rule here: don't get captured. Otherwise, it'll be rough on you. They teach violence. They learn how to break collarbones. They do stick fighting. I mean, can you imagine that the United States has something like this going on, that we teach and export around the world? And the Wall Street Journal, as I say, he's been on public television and he's been on the regular channels of news. He's no secret, and he's very open about it, what he does. He's linked to these terrorists, and this is the kind of activity that goes on to his place. The article says Camper is a natural teacher. As a matter of fact, he speaks of violent death. He teaches how to make silencers. He teaches people how to work with live ammunition, and they firearms include Soviet, Czechoslovakian, British, Belgian, and Israeli weapons. Well, the reason they use those, similar to the weapons found at Grenada, is they could say Maurice Bishop had so many Soviet weapons. They learned to use Eastern Bloc weapons that I imagine, and many of them are supplied by Samuel Cummings, the arms merchant from London and from Virginia, and he buys up all these various weapons from other countries so that when the weapons are found, you say, oh, I found the weapon of a communist. So they train with those weapons, and they learn how to burn trees, and they teach them a lot about fire and almost being burned. The Wall Street Journal said the TV crews were attracted by the Sikh affair, the Air India, where 329 were killed, the airplane in Japan that blew up with 2 killed. They refer to it as the Sikh affair. Camper, wearing his fatigue clothes, interviewed TV crews, and he's not ashamed of what he does. And he talks about special exercises he have where there's no escape, where they're armed with sticks and tear gas, and it's a Houdini type of activity where they blindfold somebody, tie him to a tree, bend his knees so the fire gets in his face, and he smells only smoke, and they bring him almost to the point of burning to death. And as he screams louder and louder, nobody's allowed to capture him. They'll be punished if they do, and he has to go through this torture, which is what they described as beyond serious. The torture is done to instill pure fear. It's not a game. It's a real life, according to Camper. The dream world depends upon running water, electricity, traffic lights, and legislation. This is what Camper is saying. The dream world consists of these. This is the world that goes off with the flick of a switch. But Camper, a Vietnam veteran who found the Mercenary Association, is talking about the real world. There's a gentleman there, Pablo, who lost his front teeth working in Lebanon as a mercenary, and various people who have been injured are at that school as an illustration of what happens, but they continue training other people. Camper has worked as a commercial artist, a mechanic for the Porsche. He's been on racing teams in Jacksonville, Florida, but his first love is warfare. He writes for paramilitary magazines. He published 2 novels on mercenary operations. He's done Merc, Hired to Kill, run ads, and sent people to Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Belize, Panama. He has worked for the United States government intelligence gathering. This is Wall Street Journal, August 18th, 1986. Camper has worked inside the United States for government authorities. What does Camper do at his school that is legal, according to law enforcement people? And they ask the question, is there anything illegal? Well, he got caught firebombing 2 homes of nursery school teachers in California, but being an agent for the United States, you know he'll get off, and if the case was so solid against him, then they were going to murder the witness, even though she was the daughter of one of the defendants. He has Class 3 weapons dealer's license, which enables him to own automatic weapons and silencers. He has very little legal trouble with students because they sign waivers before entering into the woods. The Alabama Attorney General, Charles Graddick, complained about what he did. He filed a suit. The license was denied by the State Board of Education as being an unlicensed private school, but Camper says we're not a school, we are an association, so you can't call it an educational facility. Alabama's Republican Senator Jeremiah Denton, one of the most profound, in quotes, anti-terrorists, living right in the same area as Franklin Camper. He's chairman of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Security and Terrorism. He was going to hold hearings on whether to close Camper's school, but of course he can't close the school because Camper is part of the Jeremiah Denton team, and he hasn't done a thing about him. Camper says that fewer than a dozen of his graduates have gone to become mercenaries. One such merc with throat-cutting experience worked for the Contras, and they've been identified as helping the Contras and freedom fighters down there. And he said no one knows how many have gone on to become terrorists. Many look forward to coming back. Ted, an electrician from Houston, said, I may want to go down south as an advisor, meaning Central America. He specializes in murders, disappearances, violence, and if they do these things, they don't have to report back to Camper. Part of their instruction when they take the training course is not to give out information, and they teach them interrogation. You only tell what your name or ID is, what they need to know, and deniability, and can't be linked to Camper. And as advisor of the death squads, he teaches them what they learned here, never in the field. They won't learn that in the field. They learn it here. And he claims that he does things with the United States, which the Army can't do. And, of course, the Army uses him, and he can do the most horrible things and then send these people to Central America and all over the world, just as we had people skilled in these things that went to Vietnam. Now, another article about Camper's school was New York Times, June 27, 1985. Sikh suspects studied explosives at mercenary school. And it goes in, one former student was convicted last year of trying to smuggle guns bought from Mr. Camper into Nigeria. Another was arrested while traveling with Mr. Camper. He was convicted of possessing a bomb intended to kill a dealer in Miami drug war. Now, Camper's involved in the drug war, and it says another student who was arrested while traveling with Camper. And I mentioned that event before. Camper drove the car and was lifting up the trunk lid and was with the gentleman, and they had the machine gun to kill somebody. He was part of the Miami drug war, and they were going to kill somebody in Miami on a drug-related matter. But Camper's friend, Mr. Lisenby, was arrested. Camper wasn't. He walks away. And then they mentioned also in this New York Times article how they were arrested trespassing the Crystal River nuclear plant in Citrus County, Florida, carrying Soviet, Israeli, Japanese-made automatic weapons. And, of course, nothing happens to Mr. Camper there. And this article from the New York Times links him, the people who trained with him, to the Air India that went down and the one that flew over to Japan and blew up there at the airport. So he's active with people in the drug field, and he's not concerned about being arrested because he's too close up to the people in the Pentagon, and he's useful for their purposes. He doesn't ask their intentions, as I say, when they come there. Now, Mrs. Camper was interviewed in this article, and she said the course started because we don't like commies. We don't like communism. Now, they don't like communism at home. They're going to do and are doing at home what they say they're going to do overseas. And now that Reagan has said you can go into 50 states, you can believe that the military won't be so kind as the activities heat up. She said Americans are very naive when it comes to what is going on. Most have no idea communists are moving in to Mexico, and a lot don't realize what's north of Mexico. So here again begins the line that the Judge Coffin report provide the president of the invasion of coming into the United States. For she said the course is survival, killing in the jungle, and for Mr. Camper, the basics include the way to kill a person with a knife. Many people don't know how to do that, he said, and he teaches them how to kill with a knife. Another article in the Washington Times, 1986, Air India suspect attended Alabama commando camp, and that, again, is about Franklin Camper. There's a quotation in this article. Mrs. Camper said, "It wouldn't bother me if one of my husband's students turned out to be a killer." Air India, well, the figure's 326, 325 to 326. Air India didn't necessarily have communists on board. It could be people that are innocent, but in the interview in the Washington Times, it didn't bother at all. And she speaks about the Sikhs who came to their camp and how she helps Franklin Camper train these people and how they're sent all over the world, and that Lal Singh and 3 other Sikhs who signed up for his course were arrested when they planned to kill Rajiv Gandhi in the United States. Lal Singh and others were trained in the use of Israeli Maduzi submachine guns, AK-47 assault rifles, M16, and a host of other weapons. They learned how to recognize and handle a variety of explosives. Now, the New Times that comes out of the Soviet Union last year, the end of 1985, had an article, "License for Murder," and it's about Franklin Camper, and the skull with 4 yellow teeth graces the entrance to his training camp to give future trainees an idea of what to expect, and it tells how he teaches the finer parts of interrogation. And the Soviet Union called attention to the fact that this 38-year-old Vietnam veteran trains mercenaries to go all over the world, and men like Camper are needed, this magazine said. So they are issued licenses for the training of killers. They are needed, and that's why they have their licenses. And in 1985, India asked the United States to stop sending Sikh terrorists, stop the training of Sikh terrorists, and from New Delhi there was an article begging us to close the mercenary schools, that at least 4 people trained at Camper's school were linked to these airplane accidents and bombings, and they're trained how to kill and bomb installations. And some of the lawmakers had criticized the United States and training camps, and there's an allegation they were being directed by the CIA in an effort to destabilize India, and they fingered them as being part of the intelligence community, and Camper is part of the intelligence community. Another story, in July 85, Gandhi assails U.S. on Sikh training, and he personally was angry that the United States has this school, and talked about the camp where Franklin Camper trains these people who blow up airplanes and try to assassinate individuals and are going to cause nothing but violence. Now, just this week, July 26th, a couple of days ago, Hindus massacred, 2 days ago actually, 13 killed by Sikh extremists. They halted a luxury passenger bus in New Delhi in a rural area, singled out the Hindu passengers, and killed at least 13. It was the worst attack in years. And so that this isn't something that just happened in 1985. This chronology is going on, and the Indian Express, the largest newspaper, said that 600 people have been killed in the last 10 months as a result of this activity. And as I say, Penthouse had a 2-part story by Franklin Camper, which I won't share with you now. I'll do more on it later. But what he says about himself is only self-serving and isn't important to the story of going down to South America and into the United States, the drugs into the United States, and our troops going into South America now, where within just a 2 weeks' time, the president has allowed the United States military to go into another country under the guise of breaking up drugs that are made there and processed there and grown there, and under that guise select the country that we wouldn't attack when it had the fascist Nazi dictatorship conducted by the cocaine dealers in KLAUS Barbie, but when it was a democracy and they could make $500 million a year like the fascists, then the American troops go down and wipe it out. I didn't share with you an article on a trial that was this last March on one of the Sikhs. He was on trial for violence in the United States. His name is Mr. Again, the last name is always Singh, but there's a Burke after it just to clarify because there's so many of them. His name is Goop Partap Singh Burke. And the New York Times had a story, Sikh accused in murder plot to go on trial today. And he was acquitted, incidentally, of these charges afterwards. A 35-year-old Sikh, a computer scientist who lived and worked in the United States since 1982, went on trial in Brooklyn on charges he plotted to kill Rajiv Gandhi in the United States. The defendant, Gurpratap Singh Burke, a resident alien who lived in Park Slope section of Brooklyn when he was arrested in May, is accused of conspiring to purchase explosives and weapons to foment revolution in India of violating U.S. Neutrality Act. 2 other Sikhs, Lal Singh, whom the authorities identified of Queens, and Aman Singh, for whom the authorities had no further identification at the time, were indicted on the same charges and have eluded arrest. They got away. Mr. Burke is a Metropolitan Correctional Center. Now, the interesting thing is that Mr. Burke denied the charges. He said he's being prosecuted in an attempt to stop the Sikh people from attempting an independent country in the Punjab in India. He has an enormous rage. Now, listen to this quotation. The quotation is from William Kunstler, the attorney who was representing this Sikh, who it says that they only want to stop us from having an independent country. That's why they're arresting him. Not that bombs kill people, but they want an independent country. He had an enormous rage towards the Indian government because of what the government did to the Sikhs. One of Mr. Burke's lawyers, William Kunstler, said Friday, he may have engaged in a lot of angry talk, but nothing happened. He didn't do anything. Nothing happened because he was arrested. Mr. Gandhi, the target of the purported assassination plot for which Burke and two others were charged, is the son of Indira Gandhi, who was murdered October 1984 by two Sikh guards. Mr. Burke and four other Sikhs were also charged by federal authorities in Louisiana with planning to assassinate Bajan Lal, chief minister of the Indian state of Haryana, who was then in New Orleans for medical treatment. The charges were dismissed by a federal judge on the grounds that Mr. Lal, who was not here on official state business, was not an internationally protected person under the United States law. Can you imagine? This Sikh was going to kill a gentleman in the United States for medical treatment, but the charges were dropped because the person visiting the country isn't protected by United States law. I didn't know there was such a thing, that if a foreign person is killed in the United States, our law enforcement doesn't protect him like an American citizen. I learned something new every day, and I was totally aghast when this article came out because I didn't believe that people visiting the United States were not protected. The New York Times says the purported plot to kill Mr. Gandhi and the other acts will figure in the trial, which was to start tomorrow. An undercover operative, later identified as Thomas Norris, an FBI agent, won the Medal of Honor in Vietnam, and he was an expert in urban guerrilla warfare. He met Burke and Singh at the New York Hilton Hotel January 25th, 1985, 26, where they arranged these violences that were to take place. Mr. Norris, who was using the name Tom Nichols, posed as someone with expertise in explosive weapons and was introduced to them by Joseph Camper, who ran a camp for training mercenaries in Alabama. Now, Joseph Camper had a man infiltrating his place in Alabama who went with three others to firebomb and do physical harm in San Bernardino, California. So he didn't put the federal agent with the alleged firebombers who were to do the harm in order to stop them from doing it and arrest them and find out what they were doing. He sent them there as part of the action. So was Thomas Norris taking the training with Franklin Camper going on to do this murder and plan these murders as part of the team that were selected that Franklin Camper knew? He knew these people and sent someone to them. The fact that one was a federal agent and he didn't know it in one case could indicate that the other was a federal agent and he didn't know it also, and that this arrest took place and the event was stopped. But all of them, the Sikhs and the person involved from the federal government, were all part of the Franklin Camper operation for training mercenaries in Alabama. In two subsequent meetings, these men talked Mr. Burke and Lal Singh. They told Mr. Morris they represented a group whose purpose was to cause the revolutionary overthrow of the present government of India, and that they were going to India. They had enough explosives to blow up a large bridge and a 36-story building. On April 27th, the document said, while driving to New Jersey site with Mr. Burke and Lal Singh, they said it would be a training site for the group's activity, and they told Mr. Norris that they looked forward for someone to help assassinate Mr. Gandhi on his visit to the United States. Mr. Burke, according to material released by Mr. Kunstler, and it's interesting because he's been on all these alleged liberal or underdog courses or cases, is now with representing these Sikhs that are getting off. Mr. Kunstler was born in the Punjab area, and I didn't know that. According to material released by Mr. Kunstler, Burke, was born in the Punjab area and received his secondary and university training in London. He holds a PhD in computer and medical electronics. So a man with a PhD can get William Kunstler as his attorney, and that violence was put off. But the story gets even deeper than that, and I want to share with you an article that I got. It's March 21st, 1986, Sikh Terrorists and the Dope Connections. Now, I only have 5 seconds, so like last week, I'm running out of time. Next week, I'm going into the link of these Sikhs from London and their headquarters in New Jersey, Canada, in the United States, and then their activities down in Ecuador, and their links to drug world all over the world, into Afghanistan, Pakistan, and with the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, in the narcotics traffic. I'll do that next week. Obviously, I can't do it now. The time is up. But it gets more international, and it has to tie in with the president's sending our troops down to Bolivia as against Ecuador at this time. And the reason he's doing these things, the reason he's declaring war in the United States and allowing the troops to come in if he wants them, and sending troops overseas for drug operations, is part of a massive drug war, and all of us are in the middle and are victims of it. In the meanwhile, this is Mae Brussell. I'll be back with you next week to continue some more of the international implications of these stories.